Good morning. This is Clayton, Thoughts from Sunrise. Just getting a morning cup of coffee going. Just want to mention something real quick. I'm listening to A Course in Miracles, a practice I've been doing for, gosh, like 8 years now. And every time I listen to it and practice it, it gets deeper and deeper. Deeper understanding of oneself, relationships, how we communicate. And just listen to a little snippet, and it's talking about how um, in the quietness of the mind, there's a voice, there's an access to God, let's say, or our true nature, and um, while we're in the body and identified with the body and the body senses, we communicate through who we believe we are, and all the treachery that we experience, and how we react to the world is just a product of who we believe ourselves to be, not necessarily who we are. And there's a way to tell the accuracy of this, and it is when we believe we have secret thoughts, or when we act in defense, when we act to protect ourselves. It's acting from this belief that we're separate. It's acting from this belief that um, there's something outside that's bad, and really what that is it's a protection mechanism from this erroneous belief system that we have for numerous reasons. And if we go to this life, it could be informed from the trauma of childhood, being born, and being misinformed from generations of um, this belief that there's these differences. And when we look outside, we see different skins, different bodies, different shapes, and we generally tend to judge that which is different, or what appears to be different from us. And as we go about life, for me, this brings so much understanding to confusion, because while we are trying to connect, we're trying to express love and to receive love, we're doing it from this child-like mind, from these childish positions that where we didn't receive what we believed was necessary. Um, or we actually didn't receive what was necessary for proper cultivation, proper nurturing, and so forth. Um, and that adds to this confusion, to where, on one fundamental level, um, I really believe that we are actually caring and loving about each other, and we are just going about it in a confused way. And so when we're hurt, when we're having false beliefs about ourselves, we misinterpret the actions of others. I know for myself that this is a case, and I believe it to be true for everyone else. Until we become fully enlightened and see through the charade of these games that we play with each other, that are so incredibly hurtful at times. Um, so it's important to recognize when we're coming from a place of defense or justification, a place of anger, hurt, and so forth. And it's important to sit quietly, and to look back over one's life, to really take a look deeply at understanding ourselves, and not in a way of understanding ourselves in order to justify who we are or who we've been, not in a way to justify our behaviors, to protect this image that we hold of ourselves, because this is just an image. It doesn't necessarily mean it's based in truth. Um, because at a certain level, there's this deep, all-pervasive love that goes about, that our hearts are trying to communicate, but we're going through this headspace of trying to get these things from the world, when in truth is what we are. So I've been thinking about this quite a bit. I've been exploring this idea of boundaries, something that I've always had a big issue with, this idea of boundaries. It was always a negative thing, and recently in my life, it's become, uh, say, as far as a survival strategy, became necessary to explore this idea, not as a bad thing, but to explore what boundaries really are. And there's a negative and a positive quality to this, I found. And I think the thing that I resisted for so long, it was this idea of boundaries and how I've heard it, was because it it creates and it maintains that separation, it maintains that division, because boundaries as a way to protect oneself, um, is in a manner in which it pushes someone away is not necessarily a good thing. As I've been exploring this, uh, for in my own life, I've learned that from my own childhood, I've learned to not have any boundaries, which means to not know where my body stops and where the other one begins, where my mind stops and where the other one begins. And in a sense, this was a great gift, because it really allowed me to see into the minds of others. But if I didn't know, let's say if I don't, and I know that a lot of people share this, so I'm not alone in this. So I feel comfortable being vulnerable enough to share this. Um, that when I don't know where my mind stops and someone else's begins, the the thoughts and feelings of others would permeate my being, and that creates a lot of confusion because then there's not a clear way to navigate this and navigate these relationships. So as I started to explore this idea of boundaries, it's really an exploration of who am I, and who is what is my authentic expression, what is my role in the world, and um, I think when we can find that, we can navigate these relationships and act on truth and not act on untruth and not act in judgment or in a way that is damaging to relationships. This is, I think, a very important thing to understand and to look into. Instead of saying, "Well, this is who I am," and that's not okay, I think is where I get some internal response to in a way where I don't like it, because that creates that division when we're actually trying to connect. But to know that if I'm receiving impressions and they're negative impressions, and if I can clarify if this is true to my nature, I can then um, give it reality or not. And see, this is where we help each other out, and I'm just learning this. So as I'm talking about it, this is sort of much fresher realizations and understandings that I have not lived by because I was unaware of it. And so um, this is an interesting implication that to understand that our minds are joined, our minds are shared, and and as we experience ourselves as separate, when someone can feel my impressions, um, and when we validate that reality, since the minds are shared, then I believe that reality is real, even if it's negative, and vice versa. And so then that's the Course in Miracles says that whoever is more sane in the moment is the one that has the responsibility to make the decision for, say, God or the ego, paraphrasing. And so if we make the choice for God, or say higher mind or truth, it helps to take that negative aspect out of the role of the other as well, since everything is shared and joined. When we have those, when there's no boundary and these negative things come in, it turns into judgment, instead of compassion. And the one with the higher mind would have, hopefully, have more compassion in the moment, and then that can help the other navigate through their own experience of negativity, their own history, their own past, in a more benevolent way. I don't know if this makes sense. There's some great groundbreaking research that's going on in psychiatry and psychology now that's showing this, say, hive mind, or what Carl Jung would have is the social unconsciousness. I call it and I think I've heard this term before, but it's the social memory complex, where there is the shared mind. Say, like, an example would be your family. You have these family roles, and when you go away for a while, you've made changes in your life, you have transformed as a person, yet when you go back to your family events, somehow we take on the role possibly, unless you're so well developed that you have the strength to be the new person, despite the memory of who you were in that role. You know, generally say like, oh, I'm a middle child, or I'm the firstborn, or I'm the last, and there's particular roles that we've agreed upon that you fall within, and then all of the family history from all of the confusion and hurt that possibly goes on. When you show back up at a family function, we so easily fall back into that role, and it makes it difficult at family functions. And I think this is something that most everybody can relate to, because you know that it's not true to who you are, yet you've fallen into this role. And this is an action of the social memory complex, because minds are joined. So if you can recognize this, we can help each other out, help the family out. And this goes into relationship too with our partners, that if we can stand firm in the ground of the transformation that we've maintained, despite the social memory complex, which is just based on thought, and if we can beat that, then we help the others clear up their memory, transform, as we no longer validate that memory. And this is not done by having a boundary where I say, that's not okay. I mean, sometimes you do. Sometimes you have to say it's not okay, and you bring it to light, because there's different ways to relate with all these things. But not as a, don't use it as a rigid rule. If we can be strong enough in our own being, realization that we are a product of something much higher in nature than just a body that was born into this treacherous world, then we pull others out of the role of reflecting that back. In relationship, this is so important to understand that we are mirrors of one another, and so with this memory, with these beliefs that we hold about ourselves, as our partners reflect back our inner beliefs about ourselves through their actions, through how we perceive their actions, and we can become present to that. We can see the falseness of the internal accusations and start to mend those, which is one of the only useful tools of the intellect, because the intellect is only based on memory, it's only based on the known. As we can release from that, it allows for the unknown space to come in, and the unknown is where transformation occurs. And that's when a relationship, as the Course in Miracles would call it, a special relationship, can turn into a holy one. And so instead of it being a special one that's secluded, that is created on division, it can turn into a holy one where those differences go away, and there's actually a benevolent, loving relationship and recognition that we are of one source. And that's when that love that we really crave, that closeness that we really crave in a relationship, can start to flourish, instead of needing to go out and get it from other people, from all these other distractions in the world. And then we can really rest in our natural state of being, and that's when we start to get full of the love that we've been seeking all this time. So that is, I think these are really important topics to consider, contemplate. And for myself, I'm digging deep into this right now, and I think through the pain of life in general, the loneliness that occurs that we continue to cover up and mask through all of our distractions, if we're able to sit with that and really be present to it, really look into that void. I remember not long ago, very recently actually, it's still in the process of it, going through a period of extreme treachery, extreme darkness, where this see the sun here, this is my logo, the meditator. Oops, that's not the right camera. This right there, the heart center. Darkness comes up from the head, and in this heart center, when the mind is not knowing this, when the mind is not knowing and having this connection to this heart center, this seems to be a black void in the heart. There's nothing there, and it's scary. Um, it's fucking scary. And about a month ago, I was in a very dark place, and I got up about 3 in the morning and sat outside and meditated on this. And I looked into that black hole, and it was a dark black hole, and I knew that I couldn't avoid it. And so I looked into it, and I saw that little child. I saw that hurt little child, the one that was abused and neglected, the one that didn't get the love it needed, didn't have a voice to express itself. It had no way of um, knowing how to relate with the difficulties of life. And at that moment, other images flashed into my mind, and I had a very deep level of compassion and understanding why we stay busy. And I had a deep understanding of why we're so afraid to look into that darkness, because it appears to be completely enveloping blackness that we get completely lost. And what I found was it's the ego that is scared to look into that, because once it does, the ego can't exist. Once it looks into there, it understands that that's the dissolution of the ego. When you go into it deep enough, um, no longer can there be this idea that of the differences and the separation, because with that compassion, it brings so much understanding and so much of a different level of relating with the world. And we see that hurt child, we see that original pain, and there is a great sadness with that. There's a terrible sadness that goes with that. But once we can acknowledge it, once we can acknowledge that sadness that's there and really learn to relate with it, life takes on a different meaning. And no longer is there need to be this rushing around of distractions, of jumping from relationship to relationship, of constantly trying new things, not out of curiosity, but out of running, out of avoidance. And at a certain level, this world seems to be one of avoidance, especially with what we're going through, what we've been going through for the last, well, I'd say last couple of years, but actually this has been going on pretty much forever. So what we're going through now is not new. This is not new at all. It might be heightened, it might be exacerbated by conditions, but then it's really just bringing it to light. So all these difficulties, it's really showing us the level of division that we have in the mind, which is a reflection of the level of division that we have inside ourselves. So if we're able to bridge that gap and bring the mind into the heart, it can bring that level of compassion to where maybe we'll see that we're all doing the same thing, but maybe from a slightly different side of the same coin, let's say. And so bringing that back into relationships, all this confusion comes up from trying to get the same thing. We're playing with the same coin, but we come from two different sides, and so we're not seeing each other. And then there's a split in the middle, and when we react to that split, it's reacting from these old hurts, these old traumas, say the original wound. In the Bible, it would be like this original sin that creates division, where then we have to clothe ourselves from shame. I think that was a big thing in the Garden of Eden, was shame, and so then Adam and Eve had to cover their bodies when Jesus came, or when God came looking for them. I don't think Jesus was alive yet. So there was this original sin, and in our own lives we have this original sin, which is not, let's call sin, the understanding of sin is incorrect. Let's say, I think Neville Goddard would call it missing the mark, and instead, or it's an error in thinking. So sin is an error in thinking, and with that, sin is incorrectable, unless you have, somehow, Jesus died on the cross for our sins, but we're still guilty. So I think the teaching of this has been in error, But if it's a mistake, if it's an error in thinking, it's correctable. It's correctable because we can make amends, we can bring a new understanding, and that then no longer is sin. It's something that we can work with. And in relationship, if we can understand that this confusion comes not because of hatred, not because of jealousy and envy and hurt feelings and all that stuff. All those things are a product of this idea that we have this original treachery in ourselves that developed this deep shame that we've been hiding from. And that set up the conditions of our lives, how we have gone about navigating relationships, and these are close relationships, these are work relationships, these are family relationships, these are casual relationships. These are the dynamics of our lives, of our jobs, all the challenges that we've encountered stem from this idea of this original sin, this original shame, where we had to cover ourselves. And we do that not just with clothes, we cover our body with clothes out of shame. And then, but we cover ourselves with our emotions. We cover ourselves with our thoughts. We protect ourselves in a way where it creates this division between myself and the world. And so I cloak my words, I cloak my intentions, I cloak everything as a way of protection. And I think if we look deeply within ourselves, we'll see how we do that. It's very subtle. I think this idea is very important. I know there's some, with this research in psychology and psychiatry, where it shows how joined the minds are, and some minds are, how would I characterize this? I want to not go too far off track on this one. Let's say we cloak it in hidden ways, like there's messages between the lines and things that we say sometimes when they're coming from a place of trying to fill this void, trying to cover ourselves. On the surface, everything looks good, everything looks benevolent, but underneath there's this hidden message, and underneath is this hidden agenda of what we're trying to get, that we feel is lacking. And since minds are shared, someone who's intuitive has a sense of this. But if this intuitive person, so this gets, so this will get into empaths in just a minute too. If it's intuitive, if it's intuited by someone else who's sensitive enough to pick up on this, but that person with the intuition also harbors hidden shame and hidden guilt and fears, then it gets interpreted through judgment instead of getting interpreted through the true nature, which is this is really just a person who's hurting, trying to receive the love. And then we can bypass the mechanism of the ego if we ignore that hidden judgment or that hidden agenda. This one is really tricky, and this would be like empaths who say they can feel all this stuff. I would consider myself an empath, even though I don't like that term. It's just an empath is really a person who hasn't developed boundaries, which is knowing where their body stops and where the other one begins, or where their mind identification of mind stops and where the other begins. And so the empath is more challenged. We're all empathic in some level since the mind is all shared, but some people have developed a sense of boundaries, a sense of identity, separate from everyone else, and others have not. And so I think the empaths are the ones that have not had that clearly defined sense. Maybe once they develop that, they can become a really powerful empath, because we can recognize the untruth of things and then not pay attention to them. It's like a physics game, like a motor. We have a motor of negative thought, a motor of negative beliefs that's running the world right now. And the more we can empower, not reject the motor of the negativity, because the rejection is acknowledging it, and so that's still giving it subtle psychic power. But if we can use that, the mind, to power the positive motor, the motor of love, the motor of connection, then then I think that's possible that the available power for the negative motor will start to shift over to the positive one, and the negative one can just fall away. It'll stop running when it stops receiving that negativity. Um, but the nuance to this is that it doesn't stop receiving the power that it needs while it's being rejected, because in the act of rejection is giving it power. This is so subtle, this is so important, and this is um, this needs a lot of very quiet, subtle mind attention, mind thought to consider this. So as the positive, which is the desired outcome, gets the attention, not against the negative one, but for the positive one, then that motor can start to spin and take the psychic juice that it needs. God, that's such a subtle. I hope someone understands that. That's such a subtle concept, but also it makes sense. It's just physics. It's mind physics. But in day-to-day life, when we're reacting to the world constantly, it's really difficult to catch up on that nuance, and it's even more difficult to practice it unless you've developed your mind enough and your heart enough to where that can be in day-to-day response to life as you're interacting with all of these things, all these people and situations that go on. You really have to take some time in the quiet, sit through the discomfort, and cultivate that motor. It's really hard to do when we're constantly running around trying to please everybody, trying to get all of this stuff that we feel is lacking. So that's why it's so tricky. Is we're always trying to fill that void. So this was a little ramble. I just had a morning cup of coffee and am getting my day started, and I wanted to capture this. So I was outside. It's like 10 degrees outside or something, so I'm layered up. Haven't really gotten to being presentable yet, but does this any of this make sense? Does any of this make sense? Are there some thoughts? This is a work in progress. This is by no means a done deal. So I would appreciate comments or thoughts on this, either in private or on public, however, whatever's most comfortable. I know sometimes people don't like sending responses to what I post in viewable space, so you're welcome to send private message if there's something that you're working through. Hopefully we can work through it together to come to a deeper understanding of how we open our hearts to the world and how we open our hearts to ourselves without needing to protect and defend and so forth. Again, this is a work in progress. I think we're all a work in progress, and I think this is valuable work to do, so that way we can feel the love that we are so desperately wanting to feel, and be the love that we so desperately want to be. So that's all. Have a great day. Thanks.